Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 13.24 Against the Rain Part 5. The end of Against the Rain is the last one, I promise.
I don't believe you, but we'll see. Alright guys, are we ready to lock in?
I'm ready to lock in.
There's a theory I've heard, but I'm not going to say it because I think it's right, but I think I've got this shepherdess thing figured out. And I would like to give special credit to, who was it on our server who came up with that? It was Ainsworth. So, Ainsworth, if you're right, I fucking see you, brother. Anyways, we ready to lock in?
Sure.
Nail Manrin looked on in dull shock at the aftermath of Musazi's strike. Hachiman had been utterly obliterated by the blast of light, and with it, half of the wooden dome had been blasted away entirely. No, does that mean he hurt our guy?
Well, he made the wooden dome. It doesn't mean he is the wooden dome. He's like shot it out.
Oh, okay. Good.
It's like, you're not your poo, are you?
Right. Well, no, but I thought he was made of wood, and he like contorted his body to be a cage.
Yeah, then he snapped it off and was like, there you go.
Alright. Rain and light poured in from the outside, along with the gazes of the gathered fighters. 3 of the 8 phases watched in awe, along with the masses of Nail Manrin's own gathered scum. Rain hung in the air, sparks hung in the air, blood hung in the air. Musazi stood at the center of the light and destruction, barely on his feet, kept standing only by the thrusters blasting out of his form. He was on his last legs. Good. Nail took in a deep breath. Even without Hachiman, he could still finish off this corpse. After having its physical form fully destroyed, Hachiman would take an entire day to regenerate. But Shamichoro was a much less complex guardian entity. By the way, if they die, do these guardian entities disappear forever?
Well, it's sort of hard baked into the system, the guardian entity system, that like when it's like at 99.9999% damage, it's like, record it, you can still recover from that, it's still good.
No, I know, but I mean, like, let's say Nail dies. Are those guardian entities lost forever, or do
go.
they go back to the computer? Ooh, okay. Even in just the few minutes since it had been destroyed, it had recovered enough that he could partially manifest it again. Nail spread his hands out, holding the single string that had regenerated tight like it was piano wire. He'd loop it around Atoy Musazi's neck and slice his head off. That, at least, was guaranteed to stop the zombie. Wasn't it? It was no surprise that Nail Manrin would question that. Over the course of this night, Atoy Musazi had been thrown, crushed, sliced, dismembered, stabbed, even impaled, and yet there he stood. Nail supposed he shouldn't be surprised. Dragon Hadrian had warned him about this after all. That man doesn't stop no matter what, he'd said. It's infuriating. Nail's hands tightened around the wire, even as it made them bleed. Just looking at this man was infuriating. By all rights, he should have accepted reality long ago. And yet he still stood. He'd suffered more than Nail had. He'd seen how the world worked, and yet he still stood. He'd been brought an inch from death, and yet he still stood! He'd savor seeing this life end. Nail charged forward in a flare of crimson aether, the ground behind him exploding into dust from the sheer force. Right now, in these last moments of consciousness, Atoy Musazi was in the zone. A state of perfect instinct that would allow him to counter any attack. But that was fine. In the midst of combat, such a thing was commonplace. Nail Manrin had killed many perfect opponents. All he needed was a moment of opportunity. He opened his mouth and roared, "Entity override! All of you, kill Atoy Musazi!" The gathered guardian entities of the Crimson Carnival moved as one, abandoning their masters to the phases and rushing in a tidal stampede towards Atoy Musazi. Some of their masters fell quickly, but there were still enough monsters approaching to form a smoke screen for Nail's advance. As Musazi slashed endlessly at the incoming hordes, Nail weaved between them, barely visible save for the slightest of red blurs. A mad grin spread across his face as he saw his opportunity come, as he saw Musazi's well of will finally run dry. Right after cutting down the final guardian entity, Musazi's eyes rolled up into his head, and he began to I lost my place. Where was I?
Rolled up into his head.
You're gonna have to highlight it. You fucked me there.
Sorry. The Blu-ray fucked you.
As Musazi... Okay. Right after cutting down the final guardian entity, Musazi's eyes rolled up into his head, and he began to collapse to the ground. He'd gone past his limit long ago, and now it had finally caught up to him. Nail lunged in. Die, he thought. Nail Manrin. Die, he screamed. Atoy Musazi! He closed the remaining distance, and there was a flash of white. The sensation of pain was so brief that Nail didn't even notice it at first. All he knew was that the wire that it was previously held in both hands was now held only in one. Even that fact barely even registered. His eyes were focused solely on the face of the man before him. Yes, the glaring face of a toy Musashi. He was still conscious. Had that been a bluff just now? No. Nail's gaze slid down to the thruster weakly blazing from Musashi's shoulder, slowly burning into his own cheek. Despite everything, the slightest chuckle escaped from Nail's lips. This man truly was insane. Before passing out, he'd set a thruster to attack his own body so that the pain would force him awake once more. He'd used his own failing body as a means to lure Nail in for the finishing blow. That was surely what this is. Nail's severed right arm, still smoking, landed a short distance away. The king of killers collapsed to his knees. He had hit his own limit long ago as well. Perhaps he could have gotten back up and kept fighting, but it was a curious thing. For some reason, as he looked up at a toy Musashi, the potency of his own aether seemed to be fading. He was losing synchronization with it. Dragon Hadrian had been right. This man just wouldn't stop. Would he? Musashi's radiant hovered next to Nail's neck. He could feel the heat on his throat. Was this what he had waited for? You win, Musashi, he said quietly. Musashi nodded as much as his body would still allow. Yes, I think I have. Then finish it. All the fighting outside had stopped. Morgan knocked, Marcus Grace, Ioneer, Yggdrasil, even the members of the Crimson Carnival. They all just watched as Musashi stood over his opponent, ready to deliver the final blow. The rain battered against the ground like applause awaiting its occasion. The wooden dome slowly crumbled around them, fragments falling like snow. Everyone was waiting. Everything was waiting. And yet, the toy Musashi did not deal the final blow. What are you waiting for? Nail growled, a note of desperation entering his voice. Finish it! Kill me! Musashi blinked, and the radiant vanished. All that was left of it was steam, hanging in the air. Nail's eyelids fluttered. As he collapsed onto the floor, he hissed, Damn you! Thump! In the last seconds of consciousness permitted to him, Musashi looked down at Nail's prone form. A shaking, bloody smirk spread across his lips. The last of his voice pushed itself up from his throat. Let God try. Then he, too, finally dropped. The battle had ended with both participants on the ground, with both participants covered in blood, with both participants on the verge of death. And yet, not a single soul watching could deny that a toy Musashi was the winner. Popcorn.
And then he's like, so how was the King of Killers? He was so strong.
They're both in the airport.
Marie's like, how strong was he?
No!
So even without Hachiman, right? I knew you could have beaten me.
Hachiman's also in the airport. Wow, what a great fight!
You gave him some good entertainment.
Oh my god, that was so peak, dude. Thank you for not killing off a character. That was nuts. Oh my god.
What a night, Alice moaned, tossing off her jacket as Rhoda and Rastarosi returned to their hotel room. Without hesitation, she threw herself down onto the couch and stretched out like she owned the place. Ruth's eye twitched as she watched Alice laze. She'd definitely have to talk to her about this later. She had no problems with the girl relaxing, but she couldn't behave like that in front of their clients. A business like theirs lived or died by their reputation. God, listen to me. Skipper would have let me get away with that. Well, Skipper could afford to let go of that stuff. He'd never had to worry about putting food on the table for whatever reason. Somehow he'd just been able to slip through life, the things he needed just falling into his hands, and they'd been pulled along the ride with him. Sometimes the conflicts he'd led them through had felt like nightmares, but these days she found herself missing them. Her heart ached. Hey, Rex nudged her arm with his fist as he stepped in next to her, clearly noticing her downcast expression. We'll get next time. Don't stress out. Right, Ruth nodded, smiling. Thanks, I'm good. Ruth Blaine was not good. There was Dragon to worry about too, wasn't there? The things he'd done, the things he was doing in the Dawn contest. Ruth wanted to say she couldn't believe it, but she honestly could. They were the kind of things Dragon would do, even if they were multiplied by 100. She suspected at first that Dragon had some other objective he wanted to achieve in this Dawn contest, but with the night's events there was no denying. He wanted to become supreme. Ellis marched up to the couch as Alice had made her own base of operations. Move, he muttered, gaze locked onto the game on his own script. Alice glanced up at him. Get lost. Ellis went to sit down, and Alice pulled her legs back to accommodate him. Then the two of them returned to their scripts. Ruth frowned. Really? Didn't they realise how unprofessional they looked? Bruno just stalked off to his own room. The fact they'd failed to meet with Dragon again was obviously frustrating him. Closing out the roll call, Ruth looked up to Roman Hitch, still in the position he'd been in when they'd left. Arms crossed, leaning against the wall, hat hanging over his scowling face. Honestly, you could make a decent living as, well, a living statue. Everything okay here? She asked. He nodded. Yup, he said gruffly. Anything happen? She asked. He shook his head. Nope, he said gruffly. Another conversationally challenged employee of Road and Restoracy. They seemed to attract them like moths to a flame. Roman hadn't been part of the company for too long, but he still seemed like a reliable guy. Reliable enough to watch over their police operations, at least.
Hold on, I'm just realizing this guy barely talks. What are the odds that Roman is a fucking Dark Star member? Tell me now, Tan.
Why would I tell you?
Tell me now.
No.
I'm seeing through you.
No, you can't see through me.
I see through you!
Do you think you can kill me with that arm?
It's already severed.
Those eyes of yours sure are troublesome.
How funny would it have been if he had, like, wrapped his one string around the dismembered arm and slapped Musashi with it?
He's like, you gave me an opportunity by extending my reach!
Nice one, cowboy.
He was a kind of scurrying that required less sleep, so they'd already agreed to keep watch overnight as well. Ruth returned the curt nod. Well, she said, clapping her hands together, the Dawn contest isn't going to stop anytime soon. I'm going to grab some sleep while I... Before she could finish speaking, though, Ray Rudisha suddenly popped up before her. Despite the tiring events of the night, the reporter's reporter's pink eyes were still bright, and her glossy lips still spread in an enthusiastic smile. Didn't you ever lose that energy? Do you have a minute? She asked cheerily. I wanted to talk to you in private. Shit. Was it Alice and Ellis's conduct she'd taken exception to, or the period they'd been separated back at the Arena of the Absolute? If they lost this job, things would become much more difficult to them. They'd lose their free ticket to the Dawn contest, along with their access to the other contestants. Ruth's heart hammered in her chest. Sure, she said calmly. Sitting room? Well, that sounds swell. The Upa Theatre was a pretty fancy hotel. The rooms had been given include a large chamber for private meetings. As the two of them walked into the sitting room, automatics built into the floor detected their presence and flipped over 2 floor tiles, revealing the chairs that had been lurking beneath them. A fireplace built into the wall sparked into life, the roaring flames and crackling wood giving the conversation a cosy feel. Can I popcorn you?
Sure. Ray sat down in one of the chairs, sinking comfortably into it and stretching. Long night, huh? Ruth took a seat in the other, hands in her lap. Her bulky, artificial legs made sitting down in a soft chair like this somewhat uncomfortable, but she'd put up with worse. Right now, she was still on the job. I'd say so. I have to apologize again. We weren't expecting that Aether ability to split us all up like that. Oh, that? Ray flapped a hand. No worries, that's absolutely fine. That's not what I wanted to talk about. Ruth furrowed her brow. What then? Did you manage to meet up with Dragon Hadrian? Her blood froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Hot tension crawled over her skin, and her breath felt sharp in her throat. In the seconds after Ray spoke those words, Ruth's mind raced with possibilities. Had she overheard Rex or one of the others talking about this, or was this some kind of trap arranged by the Supremacy themselves? What do you mean? She finally replied, her mouth dry. Dragon Hadrian? The shooting star, you mean? Miss Blaine, Ray offered her a lopsided smile. Come on. I'm not stupid. Blaine, not Road. Shit! Ruth clicked her tongue. How long have you known? It's my job to find out about these things, Ruth, Ray replied. I knew before I even hired you. Heck, I hired you because I knew. The former subordinate of Zachariah Esmeralda's trying to worm her way into the workings of the Dawn contest. You caught my interest, I guess. Skipper, Ruth said sternly. Huh? His name was Skipper. Rather than being put off by the sudden rebuke, Ray seemed to grow more interested, her eyes twinkling even brighter. You feel pretty strongly about that stuff, huh? She asked. Is that why you're here? Continuing Skipper's legacy? Ruth ignored the question and coldly asked her own instead. Does the Supremacy know I'm here? What do you mean? Ray cocked her head. I'm a wanted terrorist. How much have you told them? Are we surrounded right now? If it came down to it, you could take Ray as a hostage and use her to escape the building. They'd probably have the Slipstream Brave under surveillance, so they'd need to steal a different ship. Rex had done research on the area. He'd know the best place to hit for that, so... Oh, Ray said. I haven't told anyone. Ruth glared. Then what's your game? Ray steepled her fingers, resting her chin on them as she regarded Ruth with those piercing pink eyes. I told you. You caught my interest. I became a reporter so I could meet interesting people. That's the only reason. And you seem to become more and more interesting the more I observe you. When you were about to fight that violence woman tonight, that was enchanting. Are you coming on to me? Sorry, Ray said immediately. You're not my type. For a few seconds, they just sat in awkward silence. An automatic sneakily replaced one of the spent logs in the fireplace with a fresh one before scurrying off into the shadows. It's just the Mars rover. The little arm. Ruth tracked it with her eyes, just in case. So, Ray continued, did you meet Dragon Hadrian? Ruth snapped her gaze back up to regard the reporter. If she knew Ruth's history with Skipper, then it was no surprise she knew about Dragon. If Ruth Blaine and the Delsaid twins were trying to get involved in the tournament where Dragon was a contestant, it wouldn't take a genius to work out they were trying to make contact. For someone in Ray Rudishia's line of work, they were simple dots to connect. So her story checked out. Why do you want to know? Ruth asked slowly. Ray rolled those pink eyes. How many times do I have to say it? She sighed. I'm interested. I want to know your story. This is the first time you've seen Dragon Hadrian in quite a while, right? How does that make you feel? Shitty, Ruth answered automatically. How's that? If Ray Rudishia really was just doing this out of some weird interest, then Ruth supposed there was no harm in playing along. If she didn't, not playing along might spell the end of their employment as Ray's bodyguards, putting them in the awkward position Ruth was trying to avoid. It feels shitty, Ruth continued. It's like, I won't say he abandoned us, but he's cast us aside, I guess. I feel like I'm nothing but a spectator anymore. He's going for a goal I can't understand, and he's shutting out everyone who might convince him otherwise. It's like he's sprinting somewhere, impossibly fast, and we can't keep up. He's going somewhere we can't follow. You don't understand it? Ray cocked her head again. I don't think it's that bizarre. Skipper killed Cadman because he wanted to change things, right? But he didn't get the chance. Dragon Hadrian must be trying to continue his work, keeping his legacy alive. I think that's a commendable thing. Ruth closed her eyes. Skipper wouldn't have asked Dragon to become supreme. Never. He hated the whole system. The supremacy, the supremes, all of it. If it were up to him, he'd have torn everything down. Well, maybe Dragon Hadrian's a bit more realistic, I guess? Ray's eye twitched. He wants to become the Supreme to change the parts of the system he disapproves of. He's strong enough to pull it off, I'd say. For a long time, Ruth said nothing, just staring down at her hands in her lap. To be honest, this was probably the first time she'd voiced all these feelings out loud. It was a little unsettling how Ray Rudishia had managed to drag all this out of her with just a few words in a quiet room. She was pretty good at her job. Hey, Ray said quietly. I don't want this to feel like an interrogation or anything, but I just want to ask one more question. Then I'm done. Ruth shrugged. Go for it, I guess. You're strong. Ray leaned in, lowering her voice. You're skilled. With some training, you could really be something. Didn't you ever consider throwing your hat in the ring? For the Dawn contest, I mean? Skipper would roll over in his grave. But you never thought about it? Not once? Ruth sucked in air through her teeth. Well, maybe once, for a minute, I guess. When they announced the Dawn contest registration, but no, that's not the kind of world I want. What do you mean? Ray said, staring. Dragon and Skipper, I guess. They have these big dreams and ways they want to change everything, and this kind of view of the big picture. I don't think I'm like that. I'm fine with the small picture. I'm fine with this little world I've got around me. Is this still Ruth talking?
Yeah.
I've got my friends and my family and my life. I've built that life. That's mine. I think I'm content holding on to it. I don't need to change the shape of the world or anything like that. It needs to be changed, sure, but I don't need to be the one to change it. I'm not that arrogant. Or maybe I'm just a coward, who knows? But that's the way I feel. Ray slowly nodded, taking in Ruth's words. I get what you mean. I think that's a shame. But I get what you mean. Are we done? Ruth asked. Ray nodded. Sure, she said. We're done. As Ruth rose from her chair, her heartbeat still seemed dull in her chest. Ray had said she hadn't told the Supremacy about her. But could she really trust that? By her own admission, the reporter had hired her under false pretenses. We spelled it like British people do. Fucking kill him. Awkwardly standing there, Ruth just looked down at the other woman and saw not a trace of deceit in those bright pink eyes. At a loss for what else to do, Ruth just leaned down and patted her on the shoulder. Appreciate your Ah! Ray gasped, suddenly pulling her arm back. Still wincing in pain, she cradled the limb, the sleeve of her jacket hanging limp over it. Oh, sorry, Ruth said, her hand still hovering in the air. You okay? Fine, Ray nodded. I just hurt my arm in the crowd earlier. Dan we got your number!
I almost made it.
He almost made it. Also, the pink eyes being mentioned a lot helped.
Well, I never mentioned the Shepherdess on pink eyes.
I thought you did. She had like pink aether or something.
But never eyes. I very intentionally never mentioned her eyes.
Well, I thought she had. I remember pink being associated with her, so I was like, So this is the Arc 11 and before was the prologue. Arc 12 and 13 are part 1. Arc
13 is going to have multiple parts. So this is part 1 of Arc 13.
Part 1. What decides what's an arc?
My whim. Well,
where do we draw the line?
Well, we're still in Dawn Contest. Dawn Contest will be the arc.
but I... How?
Let the spur.
He judges me for 13 out of 10, and yet Arc 13, Part 1. I want you to consider that. Has there ever been a multi-part arc before this?
No.
No, sir.
But it's cool like this, right?
It is cool. You're so cool. God damn it. Why do you have to make Aetheral Space cool? This is so embarrassing for me. I fucking love this series, dude. I keep trying to get my friend to read it.
I can't believe
so
the Shepherdess speed ran the chicken punk fight. Just like, God, go back to the roof in like 10 minutes.
That's so evil. He left his mark, though. So his mark on the story was letting us know who the Shepherdess is. That's what he accomplished with that little stunt.
She's wounded.
Oh, man. So is her wound still infused? Is that why she can't rewind it? Wow. How does he keep the Aether up when he's disappeared?
Because he just aetherlingered.
So once she gets Panacea, that'll, like, get rid of it, right?
Well, it doesn't necessarily need Panacea. It's a big jagged wound, but it's not like she didn't tear her arm off.
Yeah. You said the bone was visible, I thought.
Yeah, but well, that medical attention.
That's a pretty... Just so you know, the bone visible is like a level of cut that's the most severe in the medical industry.
Yeah, I know.
That's like the one where get stitches in 10 minutes or you're fucked. But in Aetheral Space, my apologies.
Yeah.
With the advances in medicine, it is merely a band-aid. Oh man. I am so excited. We have questions. Fuck, and I have to get back to my movie. Questions. Where are they at? Okay. So we asked about the Aether. Yeah, I think we did all that land stuff last time. I'm trying to remember. I'm not trying to skip any questions, but there was a big conversation, so I can't tell if anything was asked between there. JT asks, what was Skipper's homeworld like?
Interesting.
I assumed he and the original Esmeralda or Zechariah lived on Azumha, no?
Yes, so
you mentioned
they would have. It would have been Azumha, though. They were big central supremacy.
But like the Azumha of 100 or 200 years ago or whatever.
It wasn't that long. Not 200 years ago.
You said he was frozen for like 50-some years, and then he was like 40.
Yeah.
And we saw it when he was a kid. So it's like about 100, right?
Yeah, around there.
So what was it like that long ago?
Well, it was just coming out of like Henry the Glutton era, so it was like out of a dark age, basically. So pretty grim.
Yeah, goddamn. All right, next question. Because
like
the geography?
Imagine Henry the Glutton era is like imagine the current era, but the Supreme is like actively a serial killer.
Imagine if Jack the Ripper was president. All right.
Basically, yeah. And also any 8 people.
Ew. JT asks, what was the geography like for the Absurd Weapons Lab?
Well, they operate from like a space station, so they can go all over the place. They're sort of central monastery or central lab.
Nice.
To wherever the research is most interesting.
And this last question from Rurum. Would Paradise Cairn's Forest of Sin be considered a guardian entity? If not, what's the distinction?
It's very similar. It's not a guardian entity because that's a specific framework where it's done in this specific way, but it's the same.
But it
sort
is
of
like
thing.
it is a living thing. That
It's
you summon
only
with
a
power.
difference of semantics, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's basically a guardian entity.
Imagine if Paradise Cairn rolled up and was like, "Behold,
Guardian
my
entity,
forest of
Yggdrasil.
Behold my forest of sin," and then one of the guys with the American guardian entities comes up and he just smirks, the shadows over his
Let's
eyes.
see you
He
copied.
says, "Guardian entity, Paul Bunyan." Oh my god. Alright, well thank you guys for watching as always, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!